Hello, I'm Pastor Tim Holscher. I have been looking in Romans chapters 9 through 11 at God's work with Israel, and we saw on Friday that they are still God's beloved. Now, we are also God's beloved, but some Christians seem to think that because we're God's beloved, we've replaced Israel, and this is what Paul has been asserting in here, is that that's not the case. Israel still has their place. They may not be the focus of what God is doing at the present time, but they still have their place within God's plan, and they are still beloved. And if they cannot be separated from God's love, well, then neither can we. But the section ends as Paul talks about God's work, what popularly we call the decree, that is what God has determined, what his plan. And some of the things he says about that decree is the fact that it is hard for us to understand, to try to trace out that decree. Now, we can know the decree of God, and in the context, as he's going to say, who's ever known the mind of the Lord, in verse 34, well, we know the mind of the Lord only insofar as he's revealed it, which is just a little piece. It's just a little piece of what God knows and has planned. Because God, he hasn't told us every detail of a plan. I'll tell you, one of the things that both David and Job tell us about God's plan is he has etched in stone the days that you're going to be on this world. We don't believe that. A lot of Christians think that our death is random. Well, he shouldn't have gone there and he got sick, or he shouldn't have done that thing and he wouldn't have got hurt, or if he would have got this treatment. All that stuff technically it's irrelevant, because in the end, God didn't determine his plan because he saw what we were going to do. He set in stone those times, and as Job says, he cut it in stone, and you cannot pass a day. You're not going to go one day past what he's determined. Now, there's a sense in which there's comfort in that, but there's also a sense in which Christians go, well, then how do I know that day? See, that's one of those little things. That's one of those many things in there that we don't know. And some people get really, really sick or have serious injuries, and they don't die. And we think, boy, by all accounts, they should have died. God, it wasn't the time that God determined for them. And then other people die, and it happens in situations which we go, wow, it's amazing that happened. What a freaky thing. But it wasn't. It is all part of God's plan. And it's a thing that should give us comfort, but oftentimes it doesn't, because we really like to think that we are the authors of our own fate in many ways as human beings. Surely the world looks at it that way, but we as Christians ought to be able to see it that way, and as Christians, a lot of times we don't. Now, the thing I wanted to sit on this passage just a little bit more, because I've been thinking about this the last couple days since I recorded this last video, and I've been thinking about how maybe some of us as Christians ought to understand God hasn't counseled with us, and we don't always understand exactly why his plan is set the way it is. And one of the problems that comes with that is when it comes to politics. And I do not like to get into the issue of politics here. Politics are part of the world system, and they're a thing that I really think, I don't find the New Testament apostles, when they're writing to the churches, ever encouraging in any way for us to get involved in politics, only for us to pray for our leaders and to submit. Now, granted, submit as long as they're not requiring you to do something or forbidding you, such as in the book of Acts, forbidding John and Peter, as well as the others, to not preach in the name of Christ anymore. But otherwise, yeah, there's all kinds of things that we can submit to, and we can make big issues out of things that are not, and are not required of us or are not forbidden of us by God in any way. And a couple of passages that come to mind, and Daniel 4 is the one that comes to mind oftentimes when I think of elections and such. It says, this sentence is by the decree of the watchers. Angelic is not technically there. And the decision is a command of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High is ruler in the realm or the kingdom of mankind, and bestows it on whomever he wishes, and sets over it even the lowliest or the basest of men. Now, the importance or the significance of what he's saying here in verse 17, and he repeats this 2 other times in here. The last time it's repeated by Nebuchadnezzar himself. Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Babylon. the leader of the Chaldeans. And God used Nebuchadnezzar to come against the people of Judah and take away the better portion of those people, leaving only some of the poorest in the land behind. And he took them away to Babylon, and they were to be there for 70 years of captivity. That deportation took place in 3 stages. But from the initial stage to its end was 70 years of captivity over there in Babylon. And I want you to look over here in Habakkuk. Now I need to back up here just a little bit. In verse 5, Habakkuk starts off being, Habakkuk is a prophet. It's his name. And he is talking to God, and he's saying he doesn't understand why God's making him see horrible things in the land. In other words, he looks around and he sees that the people where he is, that they're not acting the way they should, that it's inappropriate. And so he says here in verse 5, look among the nations, this is God now, observe and be astonished, wonder, because I'm doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told. For behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans. Chaldeans is a technical term for the Babylonians. It was a portion of them that referred to them as the stargazers, people that were always trying to observe the stars to determine the future or things that they should be doing. That fierce and impetuous people who march through the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves. In the evening, their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like eagles, swooping down to devour. All of them come for violence. Their horde of faces moves forward. They collect captives like sand. And we could go on. In other words, God says, I'm going to bring this really, really hard, very harsh, conquering nation against you. And when I bring them against you, they're going to come mercilessly. Wow. Is that the answer, Habakkuk? Habakkuk's like, God, you need to take care of this problem in my nation. Oh, this is not what I was thinking of. And you kind of pick that up later on as you read in Habakkuk, that Habakkuk himself is a little shaken by God's revelation of what he's going to do to his nation. I mean, Habakkuk's nation, the nation of which he's a part, the people of Judah. And yet he was going to do this. He was going to bring these people against him. And that person, that leader of these people, Nebuchadnezzar, as he says over here in Daniel 9, let me make this larger so you can see this a little bit better. But he says he places over it the lowliest or the basest of men, those that are low. He doesn't necessarily place over it people that are of outstanding character and merit. This is his very point. In fact, through the history of the world, there have been a lot of horrible scoundrels that have ruled in the world. And because of Daniel 4, that means they were there because it was God's determination. And we say, how? You're a righteous God. How can you use such a horrible man and a horrible government to I don't understand how it fits your ends. And I don't either. I could give you ideas. But kind of like I said last week, the problem is we read about God's decree, and then we go off and we become very philosophical with it, and we try to come up with answers for why things are the way they are. We try to explain more about God's decree than God actually himself says. Well, more than he's revealed to us, yes, the more than he says. And we struggle with that. We want to fill in places within the information that God has not specifically given us. And we think we can do that. And so we resort to philosophy, where we move beyond what we actually have stated and try to come up with something that makes sense, that fits the evidence, and we use logic and all these different processes. And that's not what we're here to do. We're here to say, this is the person that God's put in authority. I don't know why. I don't know what purpose. I don't know how this fits into his plan. I don't have to know that it fits into the plan. I just have to know the one who made the plan. And I have to know that he is a God who is indeed good. And he is indeed holy. And he is indeed righteous in all that he does, the psalmist says. And if I can rest in that reality, I can rest in the fact that he has a plan and that plan is going to be better than anything I would have put together. I don't know about you, but I've set plans and I've made plans for things, and those plans have not worked out well, or how I planned it went sideways. And it's like, I didn't anticipate it was going to do that. And sometimes be reminded that God is the one that has planned all this. And therefore, as you look around us right now at the things going on in our nation, and I'm speaking to people from the United States. If you're listening from someplace else, this may not be something you're concerned about. You may be looking at us and you think our issues are perhaps silly. Maybe you deal with them where you are. We all deal with these issues someplace wherever we are, because we rest under governments. I don't think anybody of us are living off on an island all by ourselves without any authority over us. And we need to have a certain perspective on God's work within the world system, because he does have something that he's doing, is accomplishing. And if we can remember, as he says here at the end of this section, wrong book, Romans 11, back over here, for from him, through him, and because of him are all things. To him is glory into the ages. Amen. Amen. Just an aside, amen comes from the Hebrew, true, rock solid. And when you have genuine amens, copyists put amens at the end of almost every book. But when you actually go through and look at the amens that are largely undisputed in the Greek text, they always come after a statement that says something absolutely, unchangeably true of God. To him is glory, his reputation, into the ages. That's absolutely true. Maybe you needed to think about this. Maybe you needed to think about the fact that however the election went, whether you like the results or dislike the results, whatever things may be going on in your world, and maybe it has nothing to do with the election, to remember that you have a God that is indeed in control, does rule over the kingdoms of men. You need to rest in him, in his decree, and the fact that you know that he is indeed good and holy and righteous and loving, all-powerful and all-knowing. And he is true, the one true God. Adjust your thinking with those things as you look at the world around you and your place in it. And I'm sure that it'll help you have a good day in the Lord. Thank you for joining me today.